Algebra 1, completing the square. In this concept, we're going to learn a method to solve quadratics called completing the square. Okay, I'm going to start with a little pictorial example here to kind of give you an idea of what it means to complete the square. So first of all, notice I start off with a rectangle. Look at this right here. That's a rectangle. And I want to make it into a square. So I'm going to cut things apart. I'm going to move things around. I might have to add a little bit on here to make it be a square in the end. So in the end, I want a square. Okay, so notice this rectangle. This first box is area of x squared. Length times width is x squared. The other box, my length, which is b, and my width, which is x, multiplies to give me bx. So that's my area for this box. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take this bx box and I'm going to cut it in half. I'm going to put half of it right here where it was and then the other half down here. So I'm getting closer to a square now. Now I have this little open spot left here, which I'm going to have to put an extra square into. So I'm adding on this piece right here. So when we get to this equation, we're going to be adding b over 2 squared on both sides of our equation. And this is why, because I'm adding this little box. The length of this box is b over 2, and so is the width, because it's half of our box b. Remember, we cut that box in half. So what we're doing here is we're going to take something that's currently a rectangle shape, we're going to add a little piece onto it, and in the end it's going to be a square. Okay, so this problem just says to complete the square. We already have x squared plus 8x, and we need to know what to add on. Well, from our last example, we know we're adding on b over 2 squared. Let me remind you what b means. A is this coefficient, which in this case is 1. B is this coefficient, and c is whatever we're about to add on here. So our b is 8, so we're going to take 8 over 2 and square it. 8 divided by 2 is 4. And 4 squared is 16. So here, if we add on 16, we have completed the square. Problem 2, same idea. Take b, divide it by 2, and square it. Negative 10 divided by 2 is negative 5. Make sure that you leave your parentheses around this when you square it, because negative 5 times negative 5 is a positive 25. Here are the steps on how you solve a quadratic equation by completing the square. First of all, write your equation in the form x squared plus bx equals c, so you might need to add or subtract that c term over. Then you find what b over 2 is and what b over 2 squared is. B is going to be just whatever number is right here in front of your x. Step 3 is to rewrite your equation in this form, so x plus b over 2 squared, and then equals c plus b over 2 squared. Step 4 is to solve your equation by taking the square root of both sides. We might get one solution or we might get two. Okay, for problem 3, the first thing we need to do is move that 11 over. So we're going to get x squared minus 12x equals negative 11, because I subtracted 11 to the other side. Then when we find b over 2, we're going to get negative 12 over 2, which is negative 6. And then b over 2 is just going to be, b over 2 squared is going to be negative 6 squared, which is 36. So now we're going to use these two numbers to rewrite our equation. So we've got x minus 6 squared, I use the 6 from right there, equals negative 11, and then we're adding on this 36 at the end. So we get x minus 6 squared. Negative 11 plus 36 is going to be 25. And now we solve this problem using square roots. So I'm going to square root both sides. I get x minus 6 equals a positive and a negative 5. I now need to break this into two equations. One equation is going to be x minus 6 equals a positive 5. The other equation will be x minus 6 equals negative 5. Add the 6 over. We get x equals 11 and 1. Okay, problem 4. Start by moving over our 3, so we're going to add 3 to the other side. And then we need to find b over 2, so that's going to be negative 2 divided by 2. We get negative 1. This b value came from right here. And then b over 2 squared would be negative 1 squared, which is a positive 1. So now we rewrite our equation. We have x minus 1 squared. This minus 1 came from right here. Equals, don't forget about that 3 up there, and then plus 1. I'm adding on this 1. So we have x minus 1 squared equals 4. Now we're going to solve by square roots, so take the square root of each side. We get x minus 1 equals a positive and a negative 2. So I'm going to write two equations now. I've got x minus 1 equals 2 and x minus 1 equals negative 2. Add over the 1 in both equations. We get the solutions of 3 and negative 1. Okay, with problem number 5, notice we've already got that 8 moved over, so we don't need to rearrange our equation at all. We're just going to find b over 2, so 6 divided by 2, which is 3, and we need to find b over 2 squared, so 3 squared is 9. Okay, rewriting our equation, we have x plus 3 squared equals, don't forget about this minus 8, and then we're adding on our 9 over here. We get x plus 3 squared equals 1. Square root both sides. We get x plus 3 equals a positive and a negative 1. And now you need to write two equations and solve. Pause your video now and try to do that on your own. I got the solutions of negative 2 and negative 4. Okay, problem number 6. Notice we have to rearrange this a little bit. I want to move my 8 over, so I'm going to add over 8. But I also want to move this 2x. I'm going to add over 2x to the other side also. So I get x squared plus 2x equals 8. I want you to now pause your video and try this whole problem on your own, and then restart it to see my answer. Okay, I found b over 2 to be 1 and b over 2 squared to also be 1. So I rewrote my equation. I added my 8 and 1, and then I solved both equations by square root method.